Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of The Journey of Hope. Glad you could be with us today. The Journey of Hope is a podcast that's especially designed to address the issues that men and women face after incarceration. We've got a guest today that has faced those issues and has done so in a successful way. Our guest, Merle Temple, has been in law enforcement and then found himself in federal prison. We're going to talk to Merle about how he came out of prison and the things that he did to get himself on his feet. And also, he's just got an interesting story. It's kind of fun to listen to. So we'll be back with Merle Temple right after this. I'm Rodney Mathers, and you're on the Journey of Hope. Well, hey, everybody, and welcome back. My guest today is Merle Temple. Merle has written a series of books that draw upon his experiences in law enforcement. His books, Deputy, Once Upon a Time in Mississippi, A Ghostly Shade of Pale, and The Redeem, A Leap of Faith, are used in middle schools and high schools and required reading in at least one college. And Merle, welcome to the Journey of Hope.
Hey, Rodney, it's great to be here.
Can you give us a little bit of your history? I know I just briefly touched on it, but tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll go a little deeper.
Well, a lot of people compare me to Forrest Gump, you know.
What?
I've been
Is that a compliment, or?
Well, I think they mean that I've been everywhere,
right,
seen everything, you know, met everybody. Most people read my books, all 4 books. You know, they have 2 questions for me when they meet me. They say, number 1, how are you still alive? And number 2, you must be 150 for all this to happen to one human being in a lifetime.
Jeez.
And I tell them, well, there are days I feel like I'm 150, you know. And but I've seen a lot in my life, good, bad, and tragic. It's all and a great fodder for a novelist in his old age, and all the way from, you know, my days in law enforcement and where I was almost killed many times, contracts issued on me, held hostage by drug dealers, ambushed and by a sniper in a terrible gun battle, on into the political wars, where I found out that folks tried to kill me in the law enforcement days were just amateurs compared to the political criminals that I encountered in what I call the unholy trinity of politics, crime, and business. And then all the way into, and I ran afoul of some of those folks, and a high-profile political case, and shocking to everybody, you know, I wound up in prison, and it was a high-profile political case out of D.C., and I wouldn't play ball, and I wound up, they made an example of me, even though I'd never stubbed my toe in my life.
And you got 8 years, right? You got 8 years in federal.
Yeah, I got 8 years, and the feds, you know, used to be a federal charge was nothing, you know, and now it's the state charges.
Oh, yeah.
State charges used to be the thing, and the feds were easy, but now it's just flipped, you know, with the sentencing guidelines, elimination of parole at the federal level. You know, there's no parole. If you get 8 years federal time, you're going to do 8 years, right? Yeah, pretty much, and you can get some good time, you know, if you earn it. But other than that, there's no parole, and the sentences are long and draconian, and really the judges, you know, the sentencing guidelines took the power away from federal judges, you know, for mitigating factors, history, suspicion that the government was doing funky things or whatever. But the prosecutors are really the ones who have the power now. They go with the sentence guidelines and all those ranges in there. So, say if you were involved in a case, you know, they would charge you with something applying to the main charge. But then if you had ever wired anybody about it, they add on wire fraud. If you mailed anybody about it, they would add on mail fraud. If you talked to a couple of people about it, they'd add on conspiracy. And each one of those things has a range, and they just layer up on top and on top and on top of the original charge. And, you know, you wind up with these long sentences. And, gosh, I was in with guys that, honestly, Rodney, they were charged like they were some kind of kingpins or something. And they didn't have two pennies to rub back to back, and they just crossed the wrong people, and maybe they didn't. Maybe they didn't turn evidence on some people that the government wanted, or whatever it was. And you look at these people, and they're serving 20 years, and you're thinking, this is just not right, and why are we wasting precious resources? Imprisoning people really, many of whom I met, really were no threat to anyone.
Right.
And but anyway, it changed my life, and it's what man meant for bad, God made good. And
Merle, can I ask you? Would it be okay to ask you what it was you were convicted of?
Yeah, it was. Well, it was in a political case. My boss was running for governor against the governor, and she was a sitting official, and she issued some contracts to a vendor, and the vendor later made a donation to her campaign. Well, that happens all the time, and but they're very selective in their enforcement. Not saying we didn't make mistakes, because we did, but they came back and charged us. They showed up one night at my house, the FBI, and told me that I'd been indicted, and it was just like the world flipped upside down. And
jeez.
So it long story, but I would encourage you folks who The Redeemed is the last of the 4 books. All the books are good. They're under contract in Hollywood. I've been very fortunate, and God's been good to me. He's opened a lot of doors, and these are my ministry. I write the books as fiction, but I change all the names and places.
Right.
But Criminal Minds, a TV show, read A Ghostly Shade of Pale and called me to Hollywood, wanted to represent me. I went out there and signed for their cast and had a big adventure in Hollywood. And I tell you, it's a different kind of world out there.
I was going to ask you, how did you like that? Was it a pleasing experience? Was it shocking? Was it uncomfortable? What was that like?
Well, Rodney, I'll put it this way: there's no shortage of people to witness to in Hollywood.
I hear what you're saying.
And a lot of them were not Christians,
right?
But they liked the writing, and they were very gracious to us. And actually, they told me, some of them told me, your prison time, you're in Hollywood. That's nothing to be ashamed of in Hollywood.
Wow.
They liked that, and so it gave me kind of standing of sorts.
Wow.
In Hollywood, and
I've never found Merle. I've never found my conviction or my prison time to be at any advantage at all for any social situation, especially.
Well, me too, but normally that's true. But out in Hollywood, it was just kind of a humorous aside, but we enjoyed it. We stayed out there 2 or 3 weeks and met producers, did radio and TV interviews, and they were fascinated, I think, with me, and because of my background and the books, and also because I actually had core convictions that I wouldn't compromise for money and power, and they looked at me like Scotty had just beamed me down from the Starship Enterprise.
I want to talk a little bit about you coming out of prison. That's really what we like to focus on here, and I'd like to just kind of get your thoughts, talk a little bit about how you managed that, your reintegration. So you do your time, you get out. I know you probably had a plan for when you got out. People listening to this podcast are going through this initial, I've been in prison for a while and now I'm free, so now what? Tell us about your first few months and how that went.
Well, there was, I would back up a second and say that, we started against all odds. Everybody said it was impossible. What became, we think, the most successful inmate-led Christian ministry in the history of the BOP, Bureau of Prisons, Christian movie nights. I started those at 3 prisons where I was from time to time, and God commissioned the first book, and I began to write that inside.
Wow.
So that just carried over. That whole ministry just carried over when I left, and I would have to say, people say, well, there's, all these. Some people say, well, all these good things have happened in your life. They're magnificent, but they're coincidences. And I say, well, I've noticed that the more you honor God, the more these coincidences happen. and so that's the way it was. And he opened doors for us, and then met a publisher, and then people who everyone told me would not let me in did let me in, and then Hollywood called. I mean, it was a God thing. All of it was a God thing, and trusting in Him. And that's what I would tell your listeners. It may sound like an easy thing to say, but it's not. Trust God and give everything to Him and trust Him. And
Merle, had you already started generating an income before you were released from the writing?
No. I was careful not to do that. For different reasons,
right?
But no, I didn't do that. I didn't want to run afoul of anything, and
I really don't know what the rules are on that or anything. But I was just curious, when you got out, did you already have a little cash, or so when you first got out? Just specifically, what were your living arrangements? Your first job when you got out?
I got married, Rodney, so that helped a lot. I mean, our first wife died just a few months after I went in, and they wouldn't let me go, even though it was 30 minutes away, and even though the federal judge ordered them to take me. It was very personal, and they refused. But that gave me standing amongst other inmates who also couldn't attend the loss of their loved ones, and God sent my wife's best friend, actually, to me near the end of my incarceration, and as a friend. And then we fell in love and got married, so that gave me someone there waiting for me, which was a huge help.
Right.
And the government didn't get everything I had. I had a little money set aside, and I had an advantage on a lot of guys that just come out with no support system and no financial resources. And I don't pretend that it's not easy. I stay in touch with a lot of guys that who I was incarcerated with, and I talked one through a potential suicide one night who had gotten injured and was in a lot of pain, and so just a lot of things have happened. But I've seen friends of mine who, really up against it, and they couldn't get hired. But they went out and started businesses of their own.
Yes.
They volunteer. You volunteer, let people see you, and shatter those images of what an inmate is. And
exactly.
And a lot of people think that we're all rapists and murderers, and of course that's not true. And they think, and then I've had people write me and tell me since they've listened to me give my testimony in churches and schools and whatever, and read my books, that they've done a complete turnaround, and where they once would have cursed inmates, now they want to help them and minister to them, and I think we all can, be a part of that. And
right.
There are some sites online, I think you search, and that where Christian groups will try to help inmates find jobs, and even if you get outside, you have to find something that you might feel that's beneath you, or your station in life before you went in, or not what you want, or it doesn't make enough money, or whatever. It's just like anything in life. You start out somewhere, and you build your resume, you build trust, you connect, you network with people, and show that you're willing to do anything. And there are good people out there who, once they see that, they'll take a chance on you. I don't pretend that it's easy, because it's not easy.
That's right.
And I've got some friends who've really suffered, but others just picked themselves up and said, I'm not going to let that hold me back. I'm not going to wallow either in that anger and bitterness, maybe about what happened to you, and obsess on your enemies. Please, anybody's listening, let me tell you, do not empower your enemies. If you believe in the Lord and trust in the Lord, you forgive as we were forgiven. and that will confound your enemies, believe me, more than anything that you could do, and they no longer have any hold on you, and they won't be standing between you and Jesus anymore. And so, probably preaching to the choir here, but just seen so much, and it's. I would, before I forget to, I would tell your listeners that if you want to contact me, it's you go to my website at merletemple.com and take a look there and send me a message, or either Merle Temple at bellsouth.net. That's MERLETEMPLE. I love to hear from folks. They're using my books in a lot of prisons now, and I'd like to get them out to more. So, sometimes we'll donate them to an inmate or two in a facility. So they'll put them into the pool, the reading pool for other inmates. And I think they'll find a lot of things in these books, that will give them comfort and hope, and see that all is not lost.
Your faith has played an extremely important role in your life. Were you a faithful person prior to incarceration? Is this something that you discovered while you were locked up? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I was a very nominal Christian, Rodney. I was raised in the church, but didn't understand the personal relationship with Christ. I thought he was real busy helping people who really needed him, so I'd go out and take care of business on my own.
Right.
I wanted to save the world, and I forgot that the world already had a Savior, and his name wasn't Merle. And then when the world fell on me, and all those miracles everybody said that Merle could work weren't working anymore, God, and I was flat down in the valley, with only one way to look and only one way out, the cross. God used that megaphone of pain that C.S. Lewis writes about to shout at me and said, "Can you hear me now?" And I said, "Yes, Lord, I can hear you now." When I was incarcerated in a terrible facility in Atlanta, in the ECDC, I was in isolation because I was so high profile. They were afraid I'd be killed, and there were some pretty tough people in that facility, and they were there in that jail cell in isolation where I went down on my knees and was born again there. And someone brought me a Bible. I'll tell you, Rodney, if I could find that person, I'd kiss him, and because it changed my life. And immediately the folks there in that huge place, dungeon, had not ever seen me. They'd heard of me. They knew I was there because it was such a high-profile case. But immediately, they began to come to my door when they get breaks that I didn't get. And they'd sit down on the floor and sit on the floor and stare at me through the little sliding big steel door. And they would confess things to me. Murder, horrible things I can't even talk about here. And the Cubans came, the Nigerians came, the crack addicts came, the street people came. And the Lord showed me, I was very, very inadequate and didn't understand it. He showed me, he said, "You've always reached down with a helping hand to people to pull them up, but I'm going now that you might understand Christ and his coming down into the world to save humankind. I'm going to bring you down into a world you never would have known." And it was tough, it was brutal, but it changed my life, Rodney. And people say, "Well, would you do things differently?" And I said, "Well, sometimes I'm tempted to think that, but I said, it was in prison that I've really found Christ and eternal life." I said, "How can I say that, as brutal as it was, as horrible as it was, that it was not worth it?"
And, there's something about being pushed in a corner that will make you fall to your knees, and I saw that happen a lot in prison. It happened to me, and I guess that's just what it took for me to get there. And I'm sitting here chuckling because you remind me of a story. I got transferred to a unit one time. You were talking about a rough place. Some of the people listening will relate to this, and I'm not a tough guy, Merle. I was a school teacher and never had a traffic ticket before I got in the kind of trouble I got into. But Here I was 10 years in prison looking at 10 years, and I got 10 years. But I went to this one unit one time, transfer, and they put me in front of this committee. I'm sure they do the same thing in federal prison where they decide what your housing's going to be and this and that when you first chain in there. And the warden looked at me and he said, "Do you have any idea where you are?" He said, I am tempted to put you right back on that bus and send you where you came from because you're not going to make it here. And what happened was they put me in what you call isolation, but it was a custody level where I was by myself. And listen, the first time they had a count when I was there, this is the kind of unit this was. The first time there was count time, they would rack that unit up for count. And everybody had to rack up every time they did a count. And so the guards going up and down the run, counting, and there's this overwhelming smell of cigarettes and pot while the guard is doing the counting. And I realized I'm in a rough place here. This is going to be rough. But some kind of way, they put me in general population, and I never had a problem on that unit. And I made parole when I was there. And, you got to think that that was the grace of God working in my life when I was there. Anyhow, it just reminded me of that story, Merle. Merle, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. I have not read your books, but I would like to, and I encourage people to check them out as well. Just one more time, tell us where we can get a hold of those books.
Well, just go to my website. You can get them on Amazon, but go to my website, merletemple.com, MERLETEMPLE. Send me an email. I'd love to hear from folks who've heard me on the radio and folks who've been through things that I can identify with, and let us get together and see how we can help and how together, we can change a little bit of this whole dark world that we live in.
Merle, I want to thank you again for being on the show. It's been a pleasure. We're going to take another quick break, and we'll be right back after this. I'm Rodney Mathers, and you're on the Journey of Hope.